Chapter 8. It was late in the day when they arrived in Sacramento. Herr Schnell arranged for them to stay in a hotel that night and hired wagons to take them to Gold Hill the following day. Okay wondered how many wagons it would take to carry hundreds of bamboo plants that were 12 feet high, 500 vegetable wax trees 4 feet high, 50,000 three-year-old mulberry trees, numerous tea plants, millions of seeds of the tea plant, silkworms in cocoons, and grape seedlings. Everything was packed in barrels, crates, and boxes, even their tools and personal items, including futon. By noon the next day, 3 wagons were waiting for them in front of the hotel, loaded and ready to move out, complete with drivers. Okay rode in one of the wagons with Mrs. Schnell, Francis, and Matsu. The driver kept the horses steady while Matsu lifted each of them up and into the wagon. The driver, whose name was Rusty, smiled and tipped his wide-brimmed hat to each of the ladies, and they nodded to him and said, "Ohayo gozaimasu," and he responded with something that sounded like, "Howdy, ladies." He was thin and wrinkled, but still Okay did not think he was very old, maybe not as old as Herr Schnell. His voice was deep, and he appeared to be quite strong. When they were ready to go, he released the long-handled wooden handbrake and snapped the reins. The horses moved forward and pulled the heavy wagon along the dirt road. Herr Schnell said it would take a day and a half to get to Gold Hill. The roads were hard-packed, but still they were often rough and rutted. Francis bounced along, almost flying out of the wagon, laughing when it rolled over the ruts. At first, Mrs. Schnell sat up straight, as a noble Japanese lady should, even though she looked very funny trying to be very proper. In a short time she was laughing and bouncing with Francis and Okay. The ruts soon became uncomfortable, though, and after a while Okay was thankful when the roads were not so rough. They passed other travelers on the road, on horseback or in wagons. Sometimes people would smile and wave, then turn around, seemingly surprised to see Japanese travelers, including 2 women and a little girl dressed in bright, colorful yukata and wearing the straw hats that they had purchased in San Francisco. As they passed farmhouses, Okay realized the farmers were dressed quite differently from people in the large cities. The women wore funny bonnets, huge brims over the face, and material hanging low over the back of the neck. Good protection from the sun, she decided, not so different from the Japanese cloth head covers. The men wore hats with wide brims. In Japan they wore straw hats, magawaraboshi, large and round to protect them from the sun. Men here were dressed similarly to Herr Schnell, but the women all wore long dresses or skirts and blouses with long sleeves. Skirts were full at the bottom, and women's shoes were black, high-buttoned or laced. Men's shoes looked so heavy, Okay wondered how the men could lift their feet. Later she would learn that those shoes protected feet from the dust, dirt, and clay covering the California land. They went along the Sacramento-Folsom Road to Folsom, then on to Green Valley Road heading east toward Gold Hill. They stopped near a creek at night. It was a pleasant evening. Stars shone brightly in the sky. This was the first time they would sleep on futon since they left Japan. The weather was just like an early summer day in Wakamatsu, and when Okay looked up at the sky, she felt a pang of homesickness. She turned her face into her futon and was suddenly overcome by a lingering smell of home. With one breath, she was swept away, her memories so strong that she felt like a child again. She wished she were back in her mother's arms. She wished she could hear her mother's loving voice as she sang a lullaby. She burrowed into the futon and let tears pour out of her eyes silently. "Do you miss me, Mother?" "I miss you so much." "Father, why did you send me away? Where are you?" Okay knew she should not succumb to these feelings of homesickness. She willed herself to stop. She was not the only one who was sad to leave Japan. Her job was to take care of Francis, and she had to put her whole heart and soul into doing that. The swirling thoughts subsided, and finally she slept. She awoke the next morning to talking and laughter, and she was determined to show the same excitement. This would be the last day of their long trip. "Look, Francis-chin," she said, Okay. "Look at the beautiful green hills. We will run and skip on grass as green as that and we will roll down the hills as fast as we can." And Frances giggled as she listened to her nanny, and the sound brought a smile to Okay's face. The wagon moved along slowly in its jaggedly swaying manner. Sometimes Okay looked at the mountains in the distance and was reminded of home, but she forced herself to think only good thoughts. Soon they would arrive at the Groner farm, the place Herr Schnell had purchased for the colony. The sun was low when they reached the farm, and the sky swiftly became golden as the sun started to set, spreading a glittering blanket across the hills, a promise of good fortune to come. The farmhouse came into full view as they rounded one of the curves. It was a large wood house, surrounded by a wide porch. The 3 wagons pulled up, one behind the other, in front of the house. Soon there were a few Japanese running into the yard from inside and outside the building. As soon as they reined in the horses, the newest immigrants were surrounded and welcomed by Herr Schnell's earlier arrivals. All totaled, there were now 15 Japanese people at the farm. Okay thought that the house was pleasing to look at. Behind it she could see many rows of healthy-looking fruit trees, fully leafed, not showing yet what kind of fruit they would offer, but some of them appearing to be cherry trees. If so, the cherries would be ripe soon. On one side of the house was a creek that ran swiftly down the hill and under the road to the other side of the farm. Across the road was a vineyard. Everywhere she looked, there were trees and buildings and so much land. This farm was larger than any she had seen in Japan. Yet it had been well tended by the Groner family and seemed to be welcoming the new owners. Okay felt it was so. The farmhouse was clean inside, the front room spacious. A big window looked out over the creek. 2 other windows faced the vineyard. This room was heavy with furniture, including tapestry-covered sofas and stuffed chairs, small wood tables, short gas lamps, a large table with straight-backed chairs placed around it, and a dark, flowered rug that covered most of the floor. In the kitchen, a black stove stood on short, round legs, and a counter on the kitchen side of the outside wall had a deep basin set into it. Okay saw another table with more chairs around it, not as fancy as the one in the front room. Directly outside the kitchen door was a huge well. A bucket hung from a thick rope, ready to be lowered and raised with a pulley to draw water. Surrounding the well was a big square wall of stone, waist high, wide enough to set the bucket on without spilling the water. There was a large bedroom on the main floor where Herr Schnell and Mrs. Schnell would sleep, and a small room behind it for Okay and Frances. Herr Schnell said they would fix up a space for Matsu on the main floor, too, at the back of the kitchen. There were beds in the big room, just like the ones in the hotels, and underneath each bed was a chamber pot. The outhouse was outside, through the door at one end of the short hall. The workers who had arrived earlier were all sleeping upstairs, as would the doctor and his wife. Okay prepared Frances for bed and smiled at the young girl as she quickly fell asleep. Frances had been a good little traveler. Tomorrow would be soon enough to explore the rest of the house. Okay had seen stairs in the hall, but she was too tired to be curious. She could hear Herr Schnell calling to the workers as they unloaded boxes and crates, counting and checking to make sure all the supplies had arrived safely. Then she closed her eyes. That night, everyone at the Wakamatsu Tea and Silk Farm Colony slept soundly.